UK blocks Microsoft's $69 billion Activision deal. I'm glad with this decision. Not sure the exact logic makes sense, but in general the top US tech companies, Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, are too big. They wield huge power, and can snuff out entire startup sectors with loss-leading products. The argument is always, but we don't have a monopoly in this artificially small sector X. However, I don't think that argument is the one we should be looking at when the companies involved are 1 trillion plus. Can we prove exact consumer harm in each case? No. However, I think most people can accept that there's a risk to consumers, markets, and democracy if companies become too big. Edit. Seeing a lot of comments saying UK couldn't function without Microsoft, which kind of supports my point.
It's extremely frustrating how we let the tech companies get to be this large, such that now we really have to consider blocking every acquisition, even though this one in particular, I think wouldn't be all that bad, and may actually be a positive for consumers. Activision is an unusually cruel and extremely horrible company, whereas the Xbox division of Microsoft has been one of maybe only a couple great stewards of the gaming industry for consumers. Epic is also a great company, but beyond those two when it comes to major developers publishers, there's far more bad than good. I'm genuinely of the opinion that all of Xbox, Activision, and their customers will be worse off without this deal. This is a Hacker News armchair quarterbacking stretch, but I think a really positive move for Microsoft would be to spin off Xbox into a separate company. I can't imagine the division is all that profitable. It's grown to confer practically zero positive network effects for Microsoft's other businesses. Culturally, it's got to be the weirdest thing Microsoft does nowadays. This AB deal likely single-handedly increases the valuation of the division by, 50%. Maybe more.
But in general, the top US tech companies are too big. I think most people can accept that there's a risk to consumers, markets, and democracy if companies become too big. I don't think that's true at all. If you want to make an argument that companies are too big, you need some exact logic to support it. The only solid arguments I'm aware of are specifically regarding banks, because of their systemic impact on the economy. They become too big to fail, and thereby become a moral hazard situation. Although given the efficiencies of large banks, the solution has become to regulate them more tightly to prevent moral hazards, not to break them up. But the idea that tech companies are too big doesn't have the same kind of logic behind it, and your assertion that they snuff out entire startup sectors doesn't seem to be supported by any evidence. To the contrary, they invest in entire startup sectors and competing top tech companies by competing startups to supercharge them. Competition is thriving as the big tech firms compete with each other. In the modern era of big tech, consumers seem to be doing great, markets seem to be doing great, and big tech's size is probably not even in the top 50 threats to democracy. The effects of social media is surely in the top 5 threats to democracy. But that has nothing whatsoever to do with the size of the company that owns a social network.
Note that Microsoft has an extremely high operating margin of 40%, which indicates insufficient competition. Even Apple has just 30%. With all that money laying around, they can just gobble up anything but the biggest fish.
Different industries have different margins. Apple and Microsoft are not really comparable businesses.
You have to take quite a narrow view of the business world to say Apple and Microsoft aren't comparable. They might have different products, but it's not like Apple is a greengrocer.
The entire argument behind capitalism is that high margins attract competition that drives those margins down towards zero. If that isn't happening, it's due to an environment that isn't competitive, e.g. too high a barrier to entry.
They wield huge power and can snuff out entire startup sectors with loss-leading products. More importantly, they're becoming complacent and lazy, using their legal and financial clout to kill competition, not product improvements. This is why China is so scary. Their companies have started being very competitive to US behemoths, which have been killing their competition for decades now.
This is why China is so scary. Their companies have started being very competitive. When it comes to tech regulation, the Chinese authorities have at least a 2-3 year advantage against the US-UK. Notice how the likes of Alibaba and Tencent have been brought relatively down compared to what was expected of them 5 years ago.
Kidnapping CEOs who dare speak out against your regime, you see this as an advantage.
Let's all celebrate dictatorships, not wanting other powerful entities in their country.
No, let's all celebrate market competition, the most critical part of a functioning economy. Chinese companies aren't competitive due to CCP or authoritarian regime, but they're competitive because they're the underdogs on Western markets and can't just curb stomp the competition with lawyers and DRM like US corporations can in their markets. So they're forced to compete on price, quality and features, to some extent. It's not like they're not getting Daddy Xai's helping hand. Just like companies in other healthy capitalist markets, which haven't completely broke due to consolidation.
I know a lot of people here are anti-big tech, and I am too, to a certain extent, but I want to play devil's advocate here and provide my case for the deal. Activision Blizzard was in total corporate chaos before the deal was announced. The CEO, Bobby Kotick, was accused of permitting workplace sexual harassment, and employees at the company were on the verge of mutiny. They were also seen as a stagnant publisher that only cared about its billion-dollar franchises, Call of Duty and Candy Crush, while letting its other IPs like StarCraft and World of Warcraft rot, and turning the beloved Diablo into a cash-grab pay-to-win mobile game. The Microsoft acquisition would have likely breathed some new life into the company and allowed corporate to clean up shop. This will probably lead to Activision Blizzard continuing on its previous doomed trajectory that it was on back in 2021.
Thank deity someone did. Microsoft owning both the biggest platforms and the biggest publishers is a glaring example of what antitrust regulations should exist to prevent. Every antitrust regulator in the world would have auto-blocked the merger after 5 minutes of examining the situation. Unfortunately, actual antitrust enforcement seems to have fallen entirely out of fashion.
Microsoft is third place on consoles, non-existent on PC, non-existent on mobile. And this deal would have moved it to third place in publishing.
Non-existent on PC. What's the share of PC gaming on Microsoft Windows versus not on Microsoft Windows?
Britain's antitrust watchdog vetoed the gaming industry's biggest ever deal, saying it would harm competition in cloud gaming. Cloud gaming. Really? Seems a bit tone-deaf. Is the CMA known for not understanding the markets they regulate?
I guess the Xbox Game Pass subscription service can be considered a cloud gaming service, and IRC most concerns were about COD versus Game Pass. E.g., if a new COD game is available on Game Pass on day one of release, that would indeed be an unfair advantage.
I would have thought the same, but then I tried GeForce Now. It works just fine, TM, with fiber internet. But guess what's missing? A lot of our titles. So yes, there's a problem with cloud gaming. Not sure if it's mine or theirs, though. I don't have a gaming PC right now, only a PS5. Since we're speaking of Activision Blizzard, I maybe would try Diablo 4 if it were available on GeForce Now. But it isn't, and I won't. Incidentally, I doubt there will be a console Diablo 4 for the PS5 either. They were too far into the acquisition process to not dump non-Microsoft platforms.
Honest question. How does this deal make any financial sense to Microsoft if the plan wasn't eventually to implement anti-competitive practices much later down the line? Just buying Activision and then continue to run it as if they were neutral surely makes no sense. That's clearly not why they want to buy them. I am glad that this deal has been blocked. In fact, Microsoft is already too big. It shows in their products.
I'm just glad Activision doesn't get paid out. What a terrible company it has become. Really wish they never acquired Blizzard.
Anybody who plays games is not happy about this. Activision is the worst of the worst, and the Microsoft deal was a chance to make their offering more refined and accessible via Game Pass. Especially it was about saving Blizzard from turning into total shitshow. This deal will not go through. Nothing will change. COD will remain trash. Diablo 4 will have microtransactions in addition to its $70 price tag.
This is good news?
Is it? Putting Miz in charge might have saved Blizzard from Activision. Maybe they'd have brought WoW to Xbox, or done something new with the StarCraft IP. Perhaps even a new Blizzard MMO.
Activision selling Blizzard to Microsoft would be a deal I could get behind. On the other hand, as a Mac gamer, maybe it wouldn't be so great. Blizzard have been great at Mac support, with all their titles, except Overwatch, being available on Mac since day one. but Microsoft hardly releases anything for Mac nowadays.
Diablo 4 won't be released on Mac either. I feel the days of Blizzard being a champion for Mac gaming have ended. They will continue to support it in WoW and the other legacy titles they continue to update. I'd be surprised, merger or not, if they ever release any of their new AAA titles on Mac again.
There's not many Macs with suitable GPUs for higher-end gaming, are there? And between the move to Metal as a graphics API and the transition away from Intel CPUs, porting PC games to Mac seems like it'd be rather more of a pain these days. It isn't though, when they haven't been blocking Sony from making significant purchases.
I wonder what are the actors who invest in small indie games. It seems like the indie game market is quite a complex, with a lot of bad games, but still a few games of high quality, who deserve so much more attention. I really wish there were investors who could better invest in the indie game market, and at least take more risks, and burn more cash, even if it's socially questionable. Every respectable gamer knows, deep in his heart, that the WoW game business is a horror show. I restrict myself to indie games, and I have more and more trouble finding a game that I can actually like and spend time with. It's hard to say if that's because I'm old, or if I have very specific tastes, or if I set the bar too high. There are a lot of developers out there who are ready to make games, yet it seems the market rarely lets them. Of course quality matters, but the top reason I want to make games is because I cannot find games I can enjoy, would they WoW or indie. Important note. I dislike capitalism.
I really wish there were investors who could better invest in the indie game market and at least take more risks and burn more cash, even if it's socially questionable. The challenge is that many games are labors of love that are fantastically unprofitable. AAA games with microtransactions are unpopular, but very lucrative.
Will this prevent the merger from happening in other markets too?
While morally I can agree with it, from a pragmatic and gaming perspective, I think this is terrible, since it will 100% lead to some games not being available in the UK.
Why? Revenge? I would think that all parties involved prefer money over revenge.
IANAL. But why would it be within the UK's authority to block a merger between two US-based entities? Could, I don't know, Angola or India block similar mergers? Does every country have to approve, or at least not disapprove?
I think the logic is that they can't stop the merger, but they can stop the resulting company from doing business in the UK. Angola can do the same, but possibly the resulting company will just, and move on. And possibly not so much with India or the UK, which are much bigger markets for these companies.
Given Microsoft's and Activision's respective dominance in their markets, Microsoft could ignore the regulators and keep doing business in the country. The British economy cannot work without Windows PCs, the Office suite, and Azure and OneDrive. And banning Microsoft and Activision's games would piss off half of the under 30 crowd, and by proxy, their parents. It would also be unprecedented for any country to do that.
Microsoft and Activision both have assets in the UK. Both sell products and services in the UK. And so the UK has a right to regulate their activity in the UK market. Similar situation to other jurisdictions, EU, China, India, etc.
So the UK cannot stop the takeover, but it can? Of course. Block Microsoft from carrying out any business in the UK. And that's, effectively, what's happening here?